everyone, I'm Kim Bremer, your host today for another edition of Bova News, keeping you up to date on the cattle industry's latest in technology, management, genetics, and more. The use of beef semen to get dairy cows pregnant has grown considerably over the past few years, creating a significant supply of beef and dairy crossbreds on the market. As dairy producers continue to search for a premium for these crossbred cattle, it's important for them to understand what buyers are looking for when buying these calves for feedlot programs. In today's webinar, we'll hear from 3 experts who are involved every day with buying dairy beef crossbreds and gain a better insight into what they look for in making their selections. To start with today, we have Dr. Justin Gleghorn, the Director of Value Management at Cactus Feeders Incorporated. He's responsible for Cactus Feeders' cattle break-even projection system and fat cattle sales, which represents a one-time capacity of more than 500,000 head. His activities focus on collaborative efforts with 10 feed yard general managers to evaluate endpoint management, to optimize feeding margins and carcass merit. Prior to his current role, he was Director of Livestock Hedging, handling risk management for both the beef and pork divisions of Cactus Feeders, Inc. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you. With my comments today about developing a crossbred calf that has value to Cactus Feeders, I think one of the first things that we have to address is assessing what happened to the Holstein fed model in previous years. And then we'll transition that into what does that look like when we develop a merchantable calf program when we're looking at beef-sired dairy calves. But again, the first thing we're going to talk about is what happened to the Holsteins. If we take a look at what the environment we were in the early 2010s, we were in a drought season on the beef cattle side. Our cow numbers were declining. We had tight supplies of feeder cattle. And so the Holsteins filled the hole that we had in quite a few of our feed yards. But as we put more and more of those cattle on feed, especially here in the Panhandle and the High Plains, we began to get some pushback, especially from the packers, on these cattle for various reasons. One of the primary reasons was the size of these Holstein fed cattle. Essentially, these cattle got tall and they were not able to go through these packing plants efficiently, especially these older plants that had lower rails and just could not support these long carcasses that ended up dragging the ground. And so that ended up creating a rule that we had to use on the fed cattle side to where we had to keep these cattle under 58 inches. And so that translated to typically a carcass wouldn't drag the ground. We wouldn't have tongues dragging, muzzles dragging, those kinds of things. We'll see some photos of shortly. But that was our rule that we had to work with, keep these cattle under 58 inches. Now, obviously, with the Holstein genetics, they behave a little bit differently than what we see in beef cattle. This is some work out of West Texas A&M, Dr. Ty Lawrence's group, where they showed very clearly a very linear relationship between weight of an animal, which is along the x-axis, and height of an animal, which is along the y-axis. And as you can see, as those Holstein cattle were heavier, they became taller in a very linear fashion. And so basically where the 1,413 pounds is demarcated there in the graph, that's essentially a 58-inch animal weighing 1,413 pounds. So that was our target that we had to work for to get these cattle marketed before they exceeded that 58 inches. But again, given the genetics of these cattle, the heavier they get, the taller they get. That's a little bit different from a beef animal. Typically with those genetics, the heavier they get, they don't necessarily get taller, they get wider. And they add weight without necessarily adding height. That's not the case with straight Holstein genetics. So that was one of the main issues that we had to combat and manage on the Holsteins that we had on feed 5 to 7 years ago in large numbers. And what happens in the packing plant is what we're going to go through these next couple of slides and the problems that it causes there. Again, as I said, some of these plants are 50 years old or older, and when they were originally built, the rails were not engineered to handle carcasses that fit the cattle that we're slaughtering today, not only in weight but sometimes in length. And so what ends up happening is if that carcass is not long enough to keep that animal suspended off the ground, you'll have the muzzle area, the tongue and the lips that drag there in the blood pit. And that will create some concern for the USDA inspectors and may create some opportunities where the tongue and lips are eventually condemned and don't make it into the drop product that can be sold for edible consumption. But overall, what the packing plant here in Amarillo, what they experienced was a 6.3% drag rate on those Holsteins, and that equated to about a 1.1% drop or loss in total drop value. Again, those are those products that are edible, but they're often exported to other countries, but because they're condemned, they no longer fit into those boxes and they have no value. So a 1.1% loss in drop value adds up when you're slaughtering 5,000 to 6,000 head a day. We get a little bit further down the line, and this is where it becomes a little more problematic because it does bring in worker safety. This is the evisceration table, where basically they're going to remove the internal, the intestines of the animal, everywhere from the heart all the way to the large intestine, and it's going to drop down on this table. As you can see on the photo on the left, this is a carcass that's long, and it's too long to fit that gut table, to where essentially that front end of that carcass, the shoulder and chuck area, is dragging on that table that holds the viscera. Now, what you're looking at when that viscera comes out, you've got rumen, you've got large and small intestines, so you've got the opportunity for contamination from those microbes that are in the rumen and the digestive tract of that animal, essentially contaminating lean meat there in the chuck and shoulder area. So what ends up happening is not only do they have to trim quite a bit of that lean meat off of the carcass, but it also creates some worker safety issues because somebody has to be up there to manhandle that carcass and get it situated so that they can get the viscera pulled out in a timely manner. A third component that we saw issues in with these Holsteins was livers. And what we're looking at there on the top left is a healthy liver, no visible abscesses. This liver will fit into a box and be sold for export for human consumption. We contrast that with a liver that has abscesses. These white spots that you see on the liver are basically infection points, walled off sites of infection where an abscess is being created. Obviously, that's not edible or fit for human consumption, so it will go into rendering, and we lose the value. While there's some value lost in the overall liver itself, there's some secondary effects that are related to this unhealthy liver that causes issues, and we'll see evidence of that in the following slides. What can happen when you have an infection, an active infection in the liver, is the body's going to try to wall off that infection and create an abscess. At the same time, it can also create adhesions, where the body, again, is trying to isolate that infection and keep it away from the rest of the body, but in doing so, it may allow for that abscess to adhere to other parts of the cavity, maybe the rib wall, or in this case, lean meat that's there on the top portion of the photo on this slide. And so that's meat that has extremely high value when carved out by itself to be sold for human consumption, but because it's adhered to the liver, it basically gets thrown into the rendering and has no value at all. So there's another point of lost value for the packer due to an adhered liver when it's stuck to portions of the internal cavity or lean meat. And the bottom left picture that we're showing now, this is a mess of liver and lung and heart that's all adhered in one piece. Again, lungs and hearts can be dissected out and sold individually in their respective markets, but when you have adhesion and everything comes out as one complete piece, everything goes into rendering and we have no value in any of those products. And then finally, we get to some more serious issues in terms of contamination and the implications on food safety. And think back to those earlier slides where I showed you that long carcass where the chuck and shoulder area was dragging on the viscera table. This is really where we have issues. When we have abscesses that are active, when that liver is being removed, when the viscera is being removed, there's opportunities to puncture one of those abscesses, and then obviously you've got contamination as that abscess drains. And you can see that in this photo in the top right here. You've got areas of yellow abscess that is basically leaked and is now on the not only the viscera, but it's also on the table where other portions of the viscera are being inspected and sorted out. The second photo is a little bit more detail of that condition. You've got active abscesses, and then now we have a lot of infectious substances that are now on the table, and this entire table now has to be thoroughly cleaned and ready for the next animal that comes behind it so that we don't have cross-contamination. And then finally, the bottom left-hand photo is just another example of what happens when we have an open active abscess that gets ruptured and we have leakage and cross-contamination on that table. You can see the blue ink that's on all of that product. That means it's contaminated. It will not go into human consumption. None of those products will find their way into human consumption. It's all going to go to rendering, and we have lost value there. But at the same time, from a packing plant standpoint, from a food safety standpoint, now this area has to be thoroughly cleaned so that we don't cross-contaminate the other animals that are coming behind it when we pull that viscera out of those carcasses. So at the end of the day, you know, we've got quite a few things that we have to address with the Holsteins that we have to keep in mind on what the value of these crossbred beef on dairy cattle are going forward. And this is what we had to deal with the Holsteins. Height, and then loss of valuable product coming out of the tongues, lips, cheek meat, those kinds of things. But then also inefficiencies there on the gut table, abscess livers, adhered livers, slowed down productivity, and then causes some potential for cross-contamination. One of the other things we had to deal with was muscle conformation. We knew that those straight dairy cattle had some issues with muscling, especially in the middle meats, where you're trying to sell strips and ribeyes, those kinds of things by themselves. They can't go into the grind. And this is an example of a light muscle strip loin out of a Holstein animal. As you can see, it's very, very thin. We'd like for that strip loin to be at least 2.5 inches in depth. That has appealed to the retail customer. That's what they want to see when they go buy a steak. These steaks are too thin. They don't fit. In summary, you know, on the Holsteins, things to keep in mind. They don't have as much muscling. They don't produce as much red meat as a beef animal. Dressed yield on a Holstein animal is usually around 59%. That's the ratio of carcass weight to live weight. And then when you look at red meat yield, often they had red meat yield of 66 points or less. In a beef animal, you're looking at red meat yield from 69 to 71 points. So we know the cattle don't have as much muscle, but the packers are also looking at them saying we don't get as much red meat out of every carcass, therefore we have to adjust price, and they did so accordingly. When we look at those condemnation rates that I spoke about earlier, there on the viscera table, it's common to have 75% liver abscesses. Not only did you lose liver value, but you opened yourself up to opportunity for cross-contamination. And then there on the head chain, about a quarter of those animals had condemned heads or condemned tongues and lips. Again, just lost value for every carcass that gets or for every component that gets condemned. Put that into dollars of value. You look at about a 15% efficiency loss, and those guys are targeting about $2,300 a minute in costs. So that 15% efficiency loss adds up pretty quickly when you have all those fixed costs and labor, and you have to slow down your chain to handle these problems as they come across the kill floor. And what you know, we heard from the packers was basically they felt like they were losing about $200 a head in value on those straight bred dairy cattle, the Holsteins, compared to a beef animal. And they reflected that when they bid on the cattle to compensate for that lost value. The next thing I want to address is, all right, as we move to talking about the beef on dairy, we have an understanding of what happened with the Holsteins and how we got in a situation where some packers are not slaughtering Holsteins anymore. Now let's transition to the beef on dairy and the potential that's there, but also let's focus on some of the problems and things that we have to keep in mind as we're producing these animals. From Cactus's standpoint, one of the things that we believe we have to keep an eye on and actively manage against are creating problems, especially at the calf ranch level. When we take that day-old calf and transition him over the next 150 days to something that's a little more suitable to enter the feed yard, to finish out. What happens during that 150 days? What we've seen in some cattle is aggressive feeding and the potential for acidosis. Basically, we're putting fermentable starch into the rumen, and we drop that pH, and that creates a cascade of effects that causes problems not only for the animal, but also creates long-term problems for gut health and liver abscesses, which eventually show up in the packing plant. We know that acidosis can lead to lameness, long toes, soft feet. We believe that increases the opportunity for liver abscesses, for those microbes to escape the rumen, go down the portal vein, set up shop in the liver, and create those abscesses. But then also it creates decreased feeding performance. Basically, we've created an unhealthy rumen that cannot heal itself, cannot recover, and that's going to live with that animal for the rest of its life. It's just not going to efficiently and effectively convert those nutrients that he ingests every day into red meat yield. So acidosis and preventing acidosis, especially in the young animal that's essentially a pre-ruminant, has to be taken into account and managed. From Cactus' standpoint, that's something that we are very, very aware of, and that's what we're looking for when we look for partners to feed these cattle, or guys that do not aggressively feed these cattle and take them slow. In this photo, this is an example of a beef animal that came out of a calf ranch, and he came to us at a fairly light weight, about 425 pounds, and this animal was blown out. You can see the long toes. That's obviously an indication of founder. But then you also look at the body of the animal, very tight-gutted, tight flanked, excuse me. This animal never recovered. His rumen was not developed adequately or correctly, and he was never able to utilize the feed that he ingested every day to gain weight. When we look at him as a fat animal, you can see he still has that tight look to him, tight up there in his forerib, tight in his flank. His toes somewhat healed, but still this animal was about 300 pounds behind the rest of this contemporary group. And so this is what we're looking for in those cattle coming out of calf ranches. This is not what we want to see. We want to see basically an animal that has a healthy, developed rumen that can come into the feed yard and hit the ground running like a native animal. So when we talk about muscle conformation, this is an example of what we're looking for. We're looking for some shape up in the shoulder, in that chuck area, a big top, some thickness and width out through that hip. And when you look at the photo on the right, you can see when you look at this calf from behind, this calf has a tremendous amount of muscling in his stifle and down his round. This is a heavy muscled animal, and when you hang him up on the rail, he's going to have a lot of red meat yield, and he'll have a high dressing percent, and he's going to do quite well for us. This is what we're after. Heavy muscle genetics on the sire side to help offset the dairy conformation that we see in the straight Holsteins. This is an example of what we're selecting against. This is a beef sired Holstein animal. You can tell the difference versus the previous slide. Not near as much muscling down the top, very flat in that hip and down that stifle, just not near the muscling that we're looking for. So my point here is, even though a beef sire is used, there is a dramatic difference between the quality of the sires used, and that shows up in the conformation and the amount of muscling that we see in those calves. And basically, that's going to lead to the valuation or the increased value of using better genetics, not just any black bull to get a calf on the ground. What we're trying not to do is produce this kind of a carcass. This is what a light muscled beef on dairy carcass looks like. Very flat, very narrow in that round, and no shape through that short loin into the loin area of the carcass. So this is not a suitable carcass. This is not what we're after. Light muscled, not enough muscle there to give us the weight gain or produce the product that essentially the packer and essentially at the end of the day, the consumer is going to want. When we talk about some metrics that we have on cattle that we have on feed, there is a lot of potential for these cattle to produce a ribeye area that fits the sweet spot in terms of a 11 to 16 inch ribeye, which is what we've been told the consumer finds ideal. That allows the retailer to cut that ribeye thick so that a person can take home a thick steak that's not so large that has to be cut thin to keep the weight, at a pound per steak or less. On steers, we've seen out of good beef genetics on the sire side, 85% of those carcasses are going to have a rib area between 11 and 15.9 inches. And in your heifers, about 92% of them are going to fit in that same category. Interestingly, that's the spec that Certified Angus Beef uses to brand their product. And so that's what, we target. We're trying to get those cattle so they're not so heavily muscled that they have a rib area over 16 inches, but at the same time, we have enough muscling to where they're not subpar or inferior on their muscling. And these beef on dairy cattle do have the potential to fit very nicely in that 11 to 15.9 inch rib eye area. So in conclusion, these composites, they provide quite a bit of an opportunity. They're born every day. The supply chain aspects of it, we like from a feed yard standpoint. The cattle are available every week. They can become a consistent supply chain for 52 weeks out of the year. The quality grade is without question. They do a nice job of fitting into the choice or higher USDA quality grades. And the middle meats fit an ideal size. As we saw in that previous slide, the cattle have a rib eye area that fits very nicely in that 11 to 16 inch rib eye area frame. And then one thing we didn't talk about in any detail was traceability. Again, these cattle are coming off operations where it could be utilized, or it could be recognized that we could identify the source and where these cattle originated. I think at the end of the day, the consumer has to tell us how valuable that is to them, but these cattle do have that potential where we can go provide that traceability if the consumer tells us it's important to them. These crossbred cattle, I call them composites, they have to be managed. Again, they're not all equal. Just because it's a black beef on dairy animal, not all of them are equal. We have to look at the sires that are used and understand what the sires bring to the table and what they don't bring to the table. But sire selection is paramount in valuing these cattle to us as a cattle feeder. Also, calf health and dietary management is critical. Again, these calves are going to be around for a number of days. They're going to spend about 300 days in a feed yard if they come to us weighing 350 to 400 pounds. There's plenty of time to add weight to those cattle, and I don't believe it has to be done in the first 150 days of their life from an aggressive standpoint. At that point in time, in that animal's development, it's all about building a healthy rumen, because a healthy rumen has such dramatic long-term effects on feed yard performance and the ability to maybe control liver abscesses in the packing plant. That's where the value of these animals really comes into play. In terms of marketing, a beef on dairy program, I think the producer that is responsible for creating these calves has to sell the merits of his calves. What is he doing in terms of sire selection? What's he doing in terms of managing that day old? What's being done at the calf ranch? All of those things have to be validated and basically sold, and that's what creates value to us as a buyer. That last point about the efficiency in the packing plant, at the end of the day, the number one message that we've heard from packers is, they don't want to go back to those days where they had 75% liver abscesses in these cattle. It just slowed down the kill floor too much and ate into their efficiency on getting these animals harvested, and that's not what they want to go back to. And what I don't want to be a part of is creating a situation where we can't get these cattle harvested because the packers say we don't want to mess with it. They're going to go find something else to slaughter, and then we have no outlet for these cattle, because they do have tremendous value from a carcass grade standpoint, and continuing to feed the strong demand that we have for high quality grading beef here in the United States. So we have to walk that line between those two, managing the animal, but also understanding what they can do for us from a carcass standpoint. And at the end of the day, I'll leave you with this final message. Not all dairy cross calves have equal value. It's about validating and selling the merit of your calves and the program that you have in place, and then us as a buyer having confidence that when we go and procure those animals, that they're going to meet our expectations, and building a collaborative effort and framework between who's producing the calf and us as a feeder, so that we can make improvements as needed throughout the program. So with that, that is the end of my information.
Thank you, Justin. Our next presenter is Dave Johnson from Equity Livestock. Dave is the Vice President of Marketing for Equity Cooperative Livestock Sales Association with 25 years on the job. Responsibilities include Equity's commodity trading department, calves, and sheep marketing. Dave handles the packer contracts for Holstein, Holstein Cross, and native cattle, contracts for Equity's Baraboo, Wisconsin office. Currently, Dave is a member of the National Livestock Producers Association Sheep and Goat Loan Committee and Equity's Executive Loan Committee. Welcome, Dave.
Good morning. I have a little different take on this whole thing, being up here in the Midwest where our packer base is able to slaughter Holsteins and larger cattle, a lot of cows, so we're set up with big rails. So we don't see that particular issue. However, we do see a tremendous value in these crossbreds. Equity many years ago saw a benefit in that, and we started a partnership kind of program with ABS Genetics and their blue ear tag calves, and we've seen that now for about 3 years. We've been tracking those numbers, and the beef cross calves that Equity have sold over the last 3 years in the excess of 200,000 to 300,000 calves. The beef cross calves will outsell the straight dairy bred cattle by 2 to 3 times. So that's a tremendous amount of premium built into those week-old calves that are coming to our markets. The in-focus calves actually outsell the generic beef on dairy crosses by a small percentage, but it is significant when you look at the total numbers. We also see probably 50 to 100,000 heifer calves that have come through in that same time frame, and the premium seems to be significantly better on those heifers. Crossbred heifer calves tend to sell closer to 4 to 5 times more than the straight Holstein heifer calves that are going through our facilities. So you got to take into consideration that we get all of the calves, not just the best ones. We get every single one. Typically, we get a higher percentage of the lower quality calves because the programs that are available to crossbred breeders out there do sort these calves, and we end up with some of those. So our figures are somewhat lower than what you would see on average or that you would see in a program basis. And there are a number of programs in the Midwest and West for these crossbred calves. A lot of the people that buy calves through our markets will enter these programs as they make groups and generate 400-pound calves to sell out or put into feed. One of the things that I've seen over time here is the crossbred calves have 2 different premium bases, and they show up very distinctly. First one is when it's sold as a calf. There's tremendous premium in that calf. The last one is when that cattle is finished. If it's finished properly, there is a very good premium in those finished crossbreds when done properly. People that, especially dairies that are looking to enter that market, they do need to commit to quality care and feeding for well over a year to produce that benefit. And I don't think that people are understanding just how much commitment that takes. And we see that every day. We see a lot of these feeder cattle, crossbred cattle come through our barns also, and they are actually discounted compared to straight bred beef feeder cattle. So we sell these crossbreds basically 4 different ways at Equity. We sell the calves, we sell light feeders, we sell heavy feeders, and we sell finished cattle. The calves and the finished cattle tend to have the strongest premiums in our experience. There are programs available. I like to stress that. We have started contracting crossbred cattle now with JBS in their regional plants. They're got a nice program. These cattle are not quite gonna do what the native cattle do, but they will perform pretty well. The heterosis in these cattle is a big component for them performing better than the straight Holstein cattle. We see that regularly. There's other programs further west. Creekstone has a pretty good crossbred program also. So there's lots to be said about these crossbreds, and there is a tremendous value in them. Moving on, the proper health protocol is probably can't be overstated. We need to have anybody that gets into this system doing the right things at the right time, day in and day out, every day. You just can't shortcut the process of making these cattle. It just doesn't work. They need to be done. They need to be done properly. The health protocol, from dipping navels and vaccinations and all the things that need to go into that, have to be documented, and they have to be right for those cattle to ever see a premium. With that, I guess my program's a little bit shorter than some of the others, but that's what I've got. There is premium in these crossbreds, and we're here to help people figure out how to get that premium out of them. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Dave. Our final presenter today is Roger Janes, an independent representative for Superior Livestock Auction. He spent the last 30 years marketing feeder cattle the superior way in the Midwest, including Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Montana. Roger has a degree in business and started his career at Sioux City Public Stockyards. During 33 years in that market, he owned and operated 2 successful commission firms and aligned himself, as well as his customers, with Superior Livestock. Welcome, Roger.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Kim. Superior Livestock was established in 1987. Fortunately, I've been able to be with them since 1988. We have 3 main offices, one in Brush, Colorado, one in Weatherford, Texas, the other one in Oklahoma City. There's 400 and some reps nationwide, which approximately 175 or 200 are actually very active, and we produce somewhere of selling 1,600,000 cattle a year, including beef dairy cross, straight dairy cattle, yearlings, calves, cows on calves, and wean calves. But first and foremost, we market these cattle by load lots. We contract them either for immediate delivery or for future delivery. And we have 3 different methods of marketing. We have what we call the video auctions, which we have on the satellite, on SLA television, and it's every other week. And then the off weeks on a Thursday, we have just an internet sale, which is just done through the internet media. Most of our auctions are held in the Weatherford office, which has been moved from Fort Worth. So I kind of get confused between Fort Worth. It's always been Fort Worth to me. But these auctions pretty much are in Weatherford, but seasonally we move to different geographic areas where the consigners are located. We just finished up the Corn Belt Classic last Thursday in South Sioux City, Nebraska. We've got a sale this coming week, the 24th, what we call the Tall Grass in Emporia, Kansas. And then we move from there to Loveland, Colorado, and then to Winnemucca, Nevada, and then on to Sheridan, Wyoming, and we finish up back in our Weatherford studio for the Labor Day special. So we've got plenty of sales, plenty of venues for the video auctions. The other one is called the country page, and this is where we list the same contract that you see on the video, but we would list them online and price them at a given price, and then let they either meet or beat the asking price. But generally it's like a private treaty, but you do have the video and the pictures in the contract in front of you. The other one is private treaty, but most of that, we probably sell 100,000 cattle, 110,000 private treaty. We sell approximately 120, 30,000 cattle by the country page. And like I say, the balance of them, 1.6 million a year is primarily through our video auctions. We have all three have the same thing in common, and that is the cattle are marketed what we like to call the superior way. Our rep offers guidance and advice through the entire process from consignment to delivery date. We advise communication back to the seller what the buyers are looking for, far as shot protocols, and just what the demand and the changing fluctuation in the market. When we sell these cattle, we have the consignor on the phone with us, and when we reach the final bid on those cattle, he is on the phone with the rep like myself to confirm that. And then they are paid after those cattle are delivered through a superior bonded check. A lot of people ask how Superior promotes their product, and they market cattle through a national marketing system campaign to buyers base. We have somewhere, last I checked, 8,600, but I think it's well over 9,000, approaching 10,000 registered buyers across the lower 48 states. The description of the cattle are described in the catalog by the consignment contract. We mail out some catalogs. Unfortunately, the mail is getting slower and slower, so we are making a big transition from the paper catalog to the digital format catalog, which is online, which is accessible probably a week earlier than what the paper catalog could be. So we're making that transition. We pioneered in many value-added programs. We've got the VAC protocols, VAC 24, 34, 34 plus, VAC 45, 45 plus, and then we've introduced in the last year or two what we call a VAC 60, and that's where these cattle have been weaned 60 days. We've also got the verified natural. We've got NHTC, which is a non-hormone treated value-added program. We've got the agent source. We got the export 840 RFID tag program, which allows these cattle to be sold in the United States, exported to Canada or overseas for the finish of the product. The payment is guaranteed by Superior's bonded check, and so we've never had any incidents where most contracts have what we call a down payment, but Superior has a partial payment, which in time when the buyer buys the cattle, he puts down a partial payment in which he takes absolute ownership of those cattle the day of purchase. So that is a safeguard that Superior put in many years ago. Moving on a little bit, we fill out all the necessary paperwork, we write the contract, we suggest to that consignor just how we should consign the cattle. We advise him on the base weights and what value-added programs he should use to enhance the marketing of his cattle. We have, they always want to know how do you sell them at the correct weight, and think, well, we have what we call a conventional slide, which we sell the cattle, say, based at 500 pounds. If they weigh 510 pounds upon delivery, usually a 20-cent slide, so 10 pounds, that would be $2 off the base price and off the base window. So, and we have a weight stops where we guarantee, the weight of the cattle for the buyer. We've got two-way slides, which I don't prefer because it's an up and down, and the buyers will participate in the market risk, but it's a little hard for them to take the risk of also taking the risk of management and weather that the consignor must take part of. So I advise usually the right slide, which is 70 cents, based over the base weight, based on the cost of gain. We get into the shrink. Most cattle are weighed delivery FOB that will be equivalent to a 2%. So if the cattle are hauled a certain amount of distance, usually 10 to 20 miles, they're weighed straight. If they're under 10 miles, it's a 1%. And if they're weighed on the truck, it's 2. If the cattle are weaned in the feedlot, we recommend a 3% slide. I guess I'd like to talk about on these beef dairy cross cattle. We do have a program with the agent source and the 840 EID RFID tags. And I would recommend that they get those cattle in the audit approved for China and also Saudi Arabia. The VAC protocols, we talked to the other participants talked about the the importance of a good vaccination program. And in the beef dairy crosses, we have records of date of birth. We have records from day one, going into the hut, coming out of the hut into the grow ranch, and every shot that they get, a series of double 7-ways and 4-way virals and this type of thing. But that's specifically recorded, and that's a very important thing in the management of the beef dairy cross calves. Again, we've got the VAC 24, which is 2 to 4 months of age. VAC 34, where they're vaccinated in the spring with a 7-way, and then in the fall they are preconditioned with a 4-way and another 7-way. And then we have VAC 45, and that's consistent with the VAC 34 program. But when they go into the weaning pen, then those cattle get an additional booster shot of the buff shots. I'd like to talk a little bit about technology. I mean, I've been in the business long enough. We sold cattle on the terminal market, and everything was done by telephone or data machines and this type of thing. And we had runners in the alley that would run the tickets to the office and to the USDA, and they would profile the market for that day and set it on the clipboards out in front of the USDA office, and that's how the news, market news was disseminated. But today we've got the internet, we've got cell phones, we've got text messages, we've got all kinds of things there. We moved from the satellite to where they're, I don't know what they call them, the B-band. They were very expensive in the day. We set up some of our first viewing sites either in a bank or in a cattleman's lounge somewhere where all the ranchers met, and we set it up for that these people could come and watch the viewing. And we still do that today in Lewistown, Montana, where we sold 9,000 calves the other day. These ranchers come in from about a 100-mile radius, and they sit there as a group, and we market as a group, and so they're able to do that. But with today's technology, like I say, you can watch the sale on your smartphone, you can watch it on internet. You can bid and buy on your smartphone through our click-to-bid process, where you don't have to call in. You just watch the sale. It says bid, accept, that type of deal. So we really moved, quite a ways with that. We also broadcast about 170 to 200 bull sales a year. Production, superior productions handled purebred bull sales, that type of thing. But that's about all the background I want to give you on superior livestock. But the challenge, I think, for finding for a beef consignor is finding a reliable marketing program that issues the producers the most money, that's guaranteed payment, and a very competitive buyer base. And also they need to produce a product that the buyer wants. And I think the gentleman from Cactus kind of, made light of what they need to do and what that particular feedlot is looking for and what the packer's looking for. And you also must produce a product that the buyer wants. And like I say, because of the decline in being able to merchandise these Holsteins and the process, the inefficiency of the conversion and the gain and the grade, like I say, we put these half beef type bulls on these dairy animals. And of course, a dairy animal is bred for milk production. And it's very important that you select the right type of bull. In the last 4 or 5 years that we've been kind of selling these beef we're kind of been in the experimental stage. We've tried Mlidflex, we've tried Gelby, we've tried Charlotte, we tried the Infocus and Simmental Cross, and now we're getting down with some data back on which ones are performing well in regards to the quality grade, the yield grade, feed conversion, carcass weight, and it's coming, and I think it's going to get bigger and better every year. How do we create more value for these people? Well, the first thing that you have to realize that you have to keep these calves healthy, and that was talked about earlier too. And don't burn them up. You just, like you say, you have to keep that rumen healthy. And the three things that you probably want to make sure you have is you choose the right sires, the right vaccination program, and have a really good nutritionist. And he can help you a lot. And since the cows are genetically alike, the bulls that you use now with sex semen and AI insemination, you can pick these thicker bulls, well-muscled bulls, and add that muscle and bone back to that dairy cross. And that is a good thing. You're just about, I don't want to say double the value of that animal, but very close. And the fact that they all come out of the same bull, the same back program, the same nutrition, those cattle, if you look at the videos that we've sold, they're very uniform, and that's very important. You can't have an animal with a 1,000-pound carcass and one with a 5-weight carcass. So you need to kind of get in the middle, like was said earlier, with a real thick muscled animal that would add muscle and red meat to that animal, and add to the yield and to the deal. Everyone asks how much more money is in raising these beef cross cattle, and just looking, I've seen a smaller and smaller discount every sale. We have figured most of these calves picked up a Holstein from 80 to 125. Day-old calves picked up 150 and 175. But if you go ahead and put those in a calf yard at the dairy, it takes about 16 weeks to get that calf out of the hut to 300 pounds. And then it takes another, I suppose, $200 and some dollars, over $1 pound to put additional 200 pounds on that animal to get them to 500 pounds. And I think that's the sweet spot. We can sell 380s, we can sell 650s, but I think the sweet spot for both the buyer and the seller is around that 550 pounds. And that's where you get the best feed conversion, ready gain, and better quality grade and yield grade. And I guess that's all I have, other than questions later.
Thank you, Roger. So I have a few questions for the three of you. First and foremost, in your expertise in today's market, what premiums should dairy producers expect to receive from their beef dairy crosses over regular dairy calves? Who wants to tackle that one first?
The value, that was what the question, what they could expect for the value over a straight dairy cross. Well, I would be probably a little on the positive side, or to say about double the value of that animal, but I think it would certainly be at the minimum side of 30 to 40% more value. So from a $500 animal weighing, close to 500, we should be expecting an animal at 550 bring somewhere between the mid 150s and 175s, which is $750 to $800 a head. So I'd say a minimum of $200 more. And those calves have been outselling the Bos Indicus cattle out of Mississippi and Louisiana, where they got the Brahma and that type of influence in them.
So regular beef calves have been preconditioned through a vaccination program, and they capture premiums through a lot of programs. Can the dairy beef crosses benefit most of the time from the same vaccination type programs?
Most definitely. Any documented health protocol program will be paid for by the next producer down the line, without any question. That's the better the protocol, the better documentation you have on that protocol, the more premium you will see for the set of calves that are being produced. There's no question.
Mm-hmm. And a good vaccination protocol does eliminate discounts, because the higher risk cattle will bring less, and the less risk cattle will bring more. So the premium is kind of built into the price, I think. But repeat buyers, if you send a set of calves that break or have abscesses and all kinds of rumen issues and this type of thing, and they break, and that's not a good thing. They're just not going to buy a high risk calf. So the benefit, I guess, is to try and have a uniform vaccination protocol, uniformity of size and weight, grade, conversion, and gradability and cutability and this type of thing. And when you get that reputation built, those buyers will come and pay the market for the cattle. Premiums, that's, whatever you think a premium is. I just look at repeat sales, and the market will dictate by price what the premium is.
Well, and along the lines of vaccination programs, I know each of you touched a little bit on this. What are the top things that dairy producers can do from a management perspective when raising these calves that will benefit them when they hit the market or when they go to a feedlot? Justin, I think you touched on it a lot in your presentation, but the top things again in summer?
Our priority is a healthy, developed rumen. Obviously, without the rumen, we don't have the feedability in the cattle, the feed yard performance that we're looking for. And then we also have higher potential for issues or problems going through the packing plant. So a priority for us is an animal that's been managed well for the first 150, 200 days of his life, so that when they come into the feed yard, we can get those cattle on feed and get the results that we expect out of them. From a health standpoint, I agree with the comments that yes, a vaccination program does benefit these cattle. I'm not necessarily one to give a recommendation on what that would look like. That's obviously a discussion between the producer and their veterinarian. But ultimately, I think the health professionals on whoever they're selling the cattle to, I think that needs to be a continual conversation on what's working, what's not working, to address the health of these cattle so that they come in healthier and don't have to spend so much time getting acclimated to the finishing portion of their life from a health standpoint. So I would recommend that they have an open dialogue with whoever's buying their calves, in addition to their veterinarian that's on site at the dairy and or the calf ranch.
Is there a consensus on age or weight that producers should target before they market their dairy beef crosses?
No, I was just going to say my experience is the sweet spot's around 500 to 550 pounds. And then go from there. You got a calf that's had the enough time in the grow pen, and it can be moved on in a healthy state, and less management at the feedlot that they're going to. So that's just been my experience. But we can sell any weight, 450. Depends on the room. Sometimes these dairies, they run out of room, so like you say, they have to go in and out of there about every 2 weeks with 400 or 500 head of cattle. And so if you have room, you can take them bigger, but then the cost of their production at that end will go up. So 500 pounds, 550 is a sweet spot for me.
And over in our country, we see a little different aspect of that. We see the premium built in on the front end. These young calves, a week or so old, under the right health protocol, we can see that $200 pretty quickly on that calf at that age. Those calf buyers are paying a significant premium. Last week, we had calves over $300 a piece regularly, compared to Holstein bull calves under $100 a piece on average. So that $200 can show up as early as 1 week out of the cow and be available to that dairyman. So they really don't have to carry those cattle at all if they don't wish to. They can take the premium right away. And I believe that Roger's pretty right that there's $200 premium in those cattle from start to finish. And it's just all a matter of what the resources producer wants to put behind those cattle. They can get it at the end or they can get it at the beginning. It's still about $200.
Yeah, you're right, Dave.
From our standpoint, anything lighter than 350 pounds is too small. We're not set to handle cattle that light. We can handle cattle all the way up to 900 to 1,000 pounds. And so, I think the producer just has to look at the economics of his situation, and the market will determine, what the value of those calves are at the appropriate weights. But there is a point where these cattle get too light. And obviously, I'd agree with Roger's statement that you get about 500 pounds, you get through quite a few critical points in that calf's life where he gets a little more manageable from a health standpoint, as well as a social interaction standpoint, where he comes into the feed yard and hits the ground a little easier than those lightweight calves. But from our standpoint, below 350 is too light. We would like to see them 400 to 550 pounds.
And lastly, today, what challenges do dairy producers have to overcome when marketing their dairy beef crosses? What's your advice? Let's start with Roger.
Okay, I think there's three that I recommend that they consider very, very tightly, and that's choosing the right sire to get that meat, muscle, and bone. The second one is the vaccination program. Then they need to choose a marketing venue such as Superior Livestock, or somebody that can advertise those cattle over a large period of country, and help them to create identity of what their program is with these beef dairy crosses. And then it's the marketing person that needs to share or expand that identity to the rest of the marketing livestock world. So
Dave?
those are the three.
Dave?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Here at Equity, we offer sales every single week for these calves coming out, and we sell these calves mostly to people that run calf ranches that will produce a consistent animal to either sell as feeders or to move into a feedlot at a later time. They have to commit to the programs. They need to produce quality cattle. They need to do it consistently, and they need to identify what their commitment is and to what degree they're going to keep these cattle in their own control. So it's a big decision for a dairyman to switch to a dairy beef bull. And they're right, they need to understand the genetics and then the commitment that how long they want to retain ownership in that calf and when is the best time to sell it for their own program.
I would agree with the previous statements. From our standpoint, I'd recommend that producer differentiate his product. I agree with Roger. That starts with sire selection. There's a difference between a good composite, a good beef on dairy cross animal, and just a black Holstein, and that starts with the sire. So you start there, and then you further differentiate your product with that calf, health management, rumen development, nutritional management, those kinds of things. And that will create the reputation for those calves when they go into the market, and that will be vetted out where those calves do command more of a premium versus just a commodity animal. So whatever that producer can do to differentiate his product, I think is primary that he has to overcome when he's putting those calves on the market. If he's going to make that decision to use beef sires on his cows, is all right, you're going through that process. Now you've got to prove that you have a product that's going to garner and is worth that value in the market.
Well, my thanks to the three of you today for joining us and sharing your invaluable expertise and experience. Don't forget to subscribe to the Bova News channel on YouTube, find our Bova News podcast on your favorite listening platform, or find more information at bovanews.com. Thanks for tuning in with us today. We'll see you next time on another edition of Bova News.